Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Season 1, Episode 5. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we're immediately picking up in the aftermath of last episode. There's been a whole bunch of chaos with everything that went down on the bus, and now everything that happened at the Arch. And obviously, what I thought was so interesting is Grover's kind of like, yo, Annabeth, they're looking at us. Because she's focused on what we see. Like, we see like 3 older ladies. I'm like, I didn't even need to know anything. I immediately was like, oh, the Sisters of Fate, of course. Because I wouldn't say DC's Legends of Tomorrow is the most recent thing I've seen that had a version of those characters. They were introduced. Technically, as a whole, they were introduced in season 5. If you've seen DC's Legends of Tomorrow, you know what I'm saying. But like, yeah, they had their own run with how they handle the Sisters of Fate. But like, obviously, when I immediately think of them, I think of like the Disney like animated Hercules movie, specifically like the One Eye thing, because I just think that's such a neat aesthetic for them of like, oh yeah, they this single eyeball and all 3 of them share it. I just think that's the coolest thing. I've never seen any other interpretation do that, at least not that I'm aware of, and granted, it's not like I've seen every interpretation of those characters, but I don't know if that's something like Disney owns that. It's like, no, they have the copyright for doing that specific version, because like I said, I haven't, any other versions I've seen haven't really done that. I think I've seen some other versions that have kind of applied. Wait, didn't technically Sandman do the Sisters of Fate, technically speaking? Yeah, I forgot about that. The Sandman, the Vertigo / DC comic thing, the live action adaptation. I was like, didn't they technically do like a Sisters of Fate thing? It's been a hot minute since I saw it, but I think there was. Either way, so that might actually be the most recent thing I saw. Either way, I just go back to that aesthetic from like the Hercules animated series, thinking that's such a cool little gimmick of like passing the eye back and forth. But obviously, the whole thing's kind of got Annabeth shook because she knows, right, them especially like cutting the thread, meaning like one of us is going to die, like our lives is going to get cut short. So she's like, no, Percy's got to be alive. And they ultimately do find him. And what I thought was so interesting, and it ends up being this little bit of a conflict for Percy in this episode, where like after last episode, he's like, oh, this person got sent by my dad. My dad actually is there for me. I never thought he would be, but because of him, I'm still alive. I was able to kind of breathe. It's so interesting because it's really more so his mom, because as we saw at the beginning of last episode, his mom was teaching him just to kind of breathe, and that was kind of their thing. She was kind of, I need you to be prepared. He's like, okay, Mom, it's okay. Just breathe. And he kind of just breathed underwater. So it seemed like it was more his mom's thing, but Poseidon's kind of getting credit for it. Now that ends up being this interesting thing because Percy starts starts coming at the gods from a different perspective, where he's like, no, like my dad, he is going to help us. We got to go to, God, where was it? They said they had to go. He was like, we'll go there. I'll meet up my dad. He's actually going to help us. It's like, will he actually help you? That's also the thing of how can you really believe someone? They're like, oh yeah, your dad sent me. It's like, yeah, but that could be some BS. You know, like the gods are all about like their twisted ways, as we kind of learn more in this episode, but we'll get to that later. But it's like, how can you know for sure that was someone sent by your dad? That's just you being kind of, young and naive and gullible. You didn't really talk to anyone else about what you experienced, so there could be more to that you're just not aware of. You're just taking it at face value. For one, even if it is Poseidon, how do you know he's not just manipulating you? And how, or on the other flip side, how do you know it's not just someone pretending to be working with Poseidon to manipulate you further? So, but like, he starts not having such a negative opinion of the gods. Because once again, Annabeth was the one that was kind of all team gods. Grover's somewhere like in the middle. And then Percy was just kind of towards the gods, because obviously it's like when your dad doesn't pay attention to you for your entire life, never did anything for you, obviously you're not going to have the best opinion of them. So, especially with all the stories his mom told him. And like I said, that's where we kind of get this interesting conflict of, yeah, he started like having a better opinion of his dad a little bit, but then it's like, oh, it comes in like conflict with the stories your mom told you about the gods, about them being one way and them not being that great, and kind of what that lesson was meant to be taught to Percy, but we'll get to that in a second. But either way, Percy's kind of the last one to figure out, oh, like, yeah, Hades might have gotten the bolt, but we don't know who actually stole it. And it's like, I'm the last one to actually think about it. And like, Grover and Annabeth were like, yeah, you are. He's like, yeah, but we kind of had to go a little detective mode in this, trying to figure it all out. And I love that Annabeth is stressing about the Sisters of Fate situation. He's like, it's okay. You hugged me. I mean, and then it's okay. We're friends now. So that's what friends do. It's like, I'm not getting so caught up on a hug, Percy. I saw, which was really sweet that she immediately hugged him, like the moment she found he was alive. I was almost halfway expecting her to hit him, you know, the type of like, almost like, oh, you idiot, how dare you scare the shit out of me like that type of thing. And you almost have Grover being over there like, okay, I mean, he's my best friend, so like, I'd love to give him a hug too, Annabeth. He's just kind of standing on the sidelines. He doesn't say anything because Grover's just like, yeah, you guys have this moment. But it's also probably a thing of, I kind of want to hug my best bud too, but sure, whatever. Yeah, told him about, because her and Grover, I think, saw them, or at least she told Grover about what she saw about the Sisters of Fate. And it's like, right, one of us might be in danger, but Percy's like, no, we're going to be okay. Like, we get to decide and choose how things play out. Like, we kind of like, this isn't like fate and destiny. Like, we kind of like, it's based on what choices we make. It's like, you know, it turns into that whole conversation of free will versus predeterminism type of situation. But they end up running into someone, and I love it. At first, I was like, "Yo, it's Adam Copeland," aka. I was like, I would assume, would it be like Adam the Edge Copeland, or I would assume that would be how it go. But I'm sure he probably dropped like the edges entirely. I don't. Obviously, I'm not well versed in wrestling, but you know, I know he was a wrestler. But like the thing I know him best for is the TV show Haven, which is a great TV show if you've never seen it. But I was like, whoa! I was like, who are you playing? Like, obviously, you're mixed up in this mythology. Who are you playing? Never would have guessed he was playing Ares. I was like, really interesting. And I love that he is such a dick. I mean, as Ares typically is, and he's all about war and stuff. He's like, yeah, truth be told is, like, my dad sent out all his kids to find the bolt. He's like, honestly, I'd kind of be fine with there being a war. It's like, you are the god of war, so it kind of makes sense why you'd be a little gung-ho about it. I also love that they do play, this is something that kind of like American Gods touched on, which I'm specifically referencing the TV show. I've never read the book. I'm sure the book probably referenced this too, but taking a lot of the stuff that makes the gods and like taking like a more modern turn to it. So for example, for him, he's like, oh yeah, I'm on Twitter like starting fights between people because like that's the new landscape for fights and conflicts between people is online. And so if you can cause a little strife online, it's like, ooh, getting his jollies off. And I was like, that's so, like I said, like the American God took that same approach of like, right, here's the modernism of gods, what they were and how they found the way to kind of go about their thing present day. Like they had to find their new lane of worship and stuff. So I think that's such a new interesting thing of like gods approaching the new world as it is and taking a lot of like, oh, Ares is the god of war, so like, oh, let's call some mayhem and strife and some wars and some battles. Yeah, it's not always the same battles, but it can lead to that. It's like, call some conflicts, you know, get stuff stirred up even online. I just think that was just kind of a neat, like, modern twist to it, adding that modern thing of like, oh yes, of course Ares would take advantage of like the constant strife that you can like initiate online and just kind of like, ooh, let me set this up and just walk away and let the chaos ensue. So, but yeah, he kind of makes it perfectly clear, gives Percy a little bit of a rundown of their family lineage of like, yeah, before I was born, my grandpa Kronos ate some of my aunts and my uncles, and my dad, Zeus, made him spit him out. And he's just like, yeah, that's kind of what our family is. Our family has been wild and crazy. It's all about backstabbing, betrayal, and using. It's like, that's always been what the gods have always been about. You kind of gotta have to get used to like, this is the family you're a part of. And just, once again, kind of like, there is that ugly side to the gods. You know, when you are that powerful, you kind of look down on other things and other people as kind of almost playthings to kind of be bit to your will. So Ares has a shield that he ended up having to leave in an amusement park, and he needs Percy and Annabeth to go get it, but he's going to keep Grover as collateral. But like Grover, like signing, like being okay with it, I thought was so interesting. But I think for him, it's like probably feeling like he hasn't really contributed as much as he'd want to. But he probably figured like, right, I'm crafty enough to figure this out. Like once again, the big question of who actually stole the lightning bolt. So he's actually spending time and talking with Ares, and like he knows how to play into Ares' ego, and he is such a simpleton he doesn't realize he's getting played by Grover. But it's like, yeah, like, oh, your sister, like she, overcomplicates things just to make herself seem smart. And he's like, thank you. Am I like the only one that sees it? He's like, no, I totally see it. Because he's like, yo, I met you at that solstice thing. Oh, here's some of your more classic wars. Some of the wars where it's like, it's a show of force that's so powerful you make the person surrender. There might not have been a lot of death, but like by a show of force you make someone surrender. That's pretty badass. And like Ares is like, yeah, no one ever talks about those wars. It's like you play into his ego and you get some supple information out of him. Because he does say something interesting where he's just like, at the end of the day, it's not like, I think it was specifically Grover that was saying like, right, like, you're the one who found the person who stole the boat. And he's like, what do you mean by that? We both know your friend didn't steal the boat. He's like, yeah, but none of that's going to matter to Zeus. And it's like, because you'll be able to be the one that found the boat before your sister Athena did. And so I'm not quite sure. I feel like I have an idea what Grover's trying to do. And he's trying to understand the motivation behind the person who would steal the boat. Like, who would have the motivation to steal the boat and give it to Hades. What would their motivation be? And I think it plays into that. It's just to be able to say, like, oh, to prove that you were able to do it and someone else didn't. Like, not saying that Ares, I don't think he's saying that Ares did do it, but I think he's trying to say, like, right, that's a motive that Ares would share along with the actual thief of the boat. We'll circle back to that when we get to the end of the episode. But I just thought that was so interesting. Like I said, because that like this is where we get into like where I run into the issue of I know story beats because of the movie. Once again, I was told the movie kind of went its own ways, but like I said, I'm sure it probably the general gist of what the lightning bolt thief storyline is about. This movie covered it. It might have gone its own way with a lot of things, but for the most part, like the general over things, some of like the minor details and the finer details, a lot of the details, in fact, might be different, but the general story beat points, it might be similar. It's kind of my saying. So, like, I'm coming in conflict with that versus, so what I know of the story based on the movie and not knowing the book and trying to find the common ground of how much is the same as the movie, even though it's been a very long time since I've seen the movie, versus like how much is being tweaked because it's supposed to be closer to the book. That's the conflict I'm coming into. So that's where I'm like, I know what the end result is, but I'm trying to understand Grover's process on figuring it all out. And that's why I'm like, considering, once again, based on the movie, I remember who stole the lightning bolt. I think I remember their reasoning and justification, because it plays into themes they've been setting up this entire time, that the gods suck. And it's just kind of like a, let's stick it to the gods type of situation. So that felt like that's where I was like, that's where I feel like Grover is kind of coming from that perspective with it. We'll have to wait to see, because like he doesn't even explain to Annabeth and Percy his thought process behind what he was able to kind of figure out talking to Hades. I mean, not Hades, Ares. But either way, Annabeth and Percy go to the amusement park, but the amusement park has this kind of like scary trap at the opening, but it's not really a trap. It's just meant to scare people away. And it even has a number to show like, oh, how many people came into the amusement park. We find out Hephaestus made this whole thing for Aphrodite's. Well, this is actually where Ares and Aphrodite's would hook up behind his back, which also isn't just from the book. I was looking into it, like their love affair is just based on like mythology too. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I don't know the pairings that well. Like, once again, I know slightly above average. I have slightly above average knowledge of Greek mythology, but and Norse. I probably know like a little more Greek than I do Norse mythology, but it's not enough to know like a lot of the pairings and like what god got with what goddess and who cheated on who and who manipulated who into killing who type of thing. So, but either way, it is kind of messed up that Ares and Aphrodite's would kind of hook up in the amusement park Hephaestus had made. It's like that's messed up. That's severely kind of like all kinds of slimy. But it's also a thing of like she didn't love him. It's just probably like a thing of he felt a way about you, but you didn't feel the same way. They don't really lean into it, but what I was reading up a little bit about Hephaestus, it's like he's not good looking. Whereas the gods are all about beauty and perfection, he wasn't. Now, that's not something they really lean into in the show. It feels like some of the depictions on when like Percy and Annabeth are going on that boat ride, it almost seems like they were implying it because like you see like, oh, she's taken away from him. It was Aphrodite's, I think, or it might have been Hera because he was trying to be with Hera but he got rejected. He tried to be with Aphrodite's and was rejected. And you see this moment where he's like reaching out as she's being taken away and he kind of shifts into like an old man. That makes me feel like that might be coinciding with that story of like, right, he wasn't perfect, he wasn't beautiful, that he was kind of imperfect and ugly in some capacity, and that's why he was kind of rejected. They don't really lean into it. Like I said, I'm bringing like that little bit of mythology I was reading online about that. Like I said, just like the fewest like sentence. So that's why I'm like, don't come at me like, oh, you're completely wrong. If I'm completely wrong, do correct me. I'm just like basing this on something I read, and that's why I was like, could we still don't. I mean, it could just simply be like, it doesn't need to be something as like, it doesn't have to be shallow, but like that. But it could just be. I mean, not finding someone physically attractive it's fine. That you're entitled to that. But it's like, if looks are all that matter to the gods, because the gods can be fickle and shallow like that. So that's where I'm like, that's where it fits into the narrative of the gods suck. They're not the greatest entities, but that led to the whole conversation where Percy was like, he said like his mom told him the story because it was meant to be a fable of be wary and never like, if you ever meet the gods, like don't ever end up like them. And Annabeth was like, well, why did you pause when you were getting to that part of the story? He was like, because my mom didn't want me to be like with any of you guys. She was like, this is the way the gods are, this is how they operate. It's like it's a situation of, it's even something kind of leaning into what Ares had said, where he was like, yeah, like there's plenty of like, Poseidon's had plenty of children, he'll eventually get bored, or you're gonna kind of toss you aside, like you're nothing special, like like all the other children he's kind of tossed aside. So that's why I kind of get that feeling. So you kind of correlate that with this whole, the gods kind of do what they want. It's all about what they want. Who cares what the other person wants? I'm going to get what makes me happy. Who cares if you're happy? And just, maybe there's something real between Ares and Aphrodite, or maybe it was just, hey, we're having fun and nothing serious. Maybe she loved him, he didn't love her, and she didn't love Hephaestus, but Hephaestus loved her. Like, it's just kind of like maybe the game that the gods play of like, oh, like we stab each other in the back, we betray each other, we take what we want type of situation. So it's like the ugly side of it. And Percy's like, maybe you were right, maybe my mom should have prepared me more. But Annabeth's like, yeah, but maybe she did prepare you by making it so that you learn the life lessons of don't end up like them. They are the cautionary tale of not to end up like, that's what, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So, and especially when that absolute power is all you've ever known, you grow an ego from that, and you'll grow up a certain way to be like, oh, like I'm hot shit, I am a god after all. So you're going to have a very, very inflated ego, and all the gods do. But obviously, this is where we get into Percy being more like his mom and who his mom wants him to be versus the god in him. Like, this is that human side of him champion and rising more, because they get to the end of everything and they find, well, first and foremost, Percy kind of saved them when they were kind of caught up in the rapids. He kind of used his water powers, and he's like, did you save me the water power thing? He's like, I don't know, maybe. He's like, I'm figuring this out as we go. But there's a chair that's a trap. That basically Hephaestus made this chair, and the moment Hera sat in it, because it was supposed to be a gift, she could I think you said it was for Hera. I don't think, because I know he used it as a bargaining chip to get with Aphrodite's, but I don't remember if Hera was the one that sat in the chair, or was it Aphrodite's? I think it was Hera, but either way, like none of the gods could pull her off of the chair, and it's like, right, I'll let her go in exchange for Aphrodite's, and the gods submitted. So that's kind of like what the story was, and it's like, it's got to be about sacrifice. And Percy decides to sacrifice himself. It's like, I will be the one to stay here because that's why I brought you along, because me and Chiron agreed on the point of you would be the one person that would sacrifice me if it meant saving the day, if it meant completing this quest. That's why you're here. And so, like, I trust you to see this through. And she doesn't want to. Like, she's like, we can find another way. Because I didn't really talk about it, but what I thought was such an interesting little element to Annabeth's character that we got this episode is that that part of Athena in her, like that wisdom and everything of, like, she gets so distracted by figuring out how something works. So the little thing at the entrance, she's like, oh wow, that's crazy. Oh, she's like, oh, look at all this. Like, she's caught up in the marvel of it, the craftsmanship, because like her brain being the way it is, like being wired the way she is, she's almost like, I gotta understand it. It's so cool. I need to understand how this all works. So it's a little bit of her mom coming through. And I was like, I thought that was such a neat little thing to kind of sprinkle in this episode of that wonderment of her just being like, oh, it's almost like it's like a tick where she has to, like, oh, I gotta figure this out. I can't focus on anything else until I do. There's a webtoon manhwa I've read called Villain to Kill, and there's a character named Driver. He's kind of like that. When he uses too much of his power, he goes into like super mechanic mode, where engineer mode, where he puts everything, all his focus into like making stuff. Just because it's like basically a backlash from using too much of his power. It kind of creates this like thing inside of him where he's driven by this desire and need to build stuff. It's a weird example to pull, but it's something more recently I've read that I was like, oh, it's a little applicable in Annabeth's case, where it almost feels like she almost has that drive, for lack of a better word, where it's just like, yeah, she kind of gets like caught up in the mechanics of something, like, I need to figure it out. Like, it's even there when she's trying to save Percy, but it's like she's not able to enjoy it. It's just like, because it's more like oh no, I need to figure this out. That's the only way I'm going to be able to get Percy out of this. But he was willing to make that sacrifice, and it's like, oh, can I ask you to do one more thing? And she's like, I promise I won't leave the underworld without your mom. He's like, also, you could come back and save me. She's like, that wouldn't even need to be said. But then, like, as he was in the seat, kind of going full, obviously it's under the Disney umbrella, but going full Han Solo, which I'm not the Star Wars person, so it is kind of ironic when I reference Star Wars. But, the carbonite of it all, I'm sure there's probably a little homage to that. I'm sure there's probably something straight out of the book, but it's probably also a little, like, aesthetically an homage to maybe that as well. I mean, who knows if the book was written in that way to also be an homage to Han Solo getting frozen in carbonite type of thing. But either way, like, he's in the chair and he's trying to say, like, no, it's okay, I'm okay, and just gets stuck in the gold. But Annabeth doesn't want to leave him behind. Got the shield and everything, but it's like, nah, I can't leave him behind. And lo and behold, who shows up but Hephaestus himself, played by Timothy Amundsen. And I was like, because I referenced this in episode 2. When I saw Jason Mazzuccas, like, from far away, because I knew at the time Timothy Amundsen, I'd seen him in the cast listing. I didn't know who he was playing, so I thought that was him until we got a close look. I'm like, oh, it's Jason Mazzuccas. But then it's like, oh, now it's like we find out who Timothy Amundsen's playing. It's like, oh, he's playing Hephaestus. It's interesting because obviously when I think of Timothy Amundsen, like, the first thing that comes to my mind is him as Lassiter from Psych. But under the Disney umbrella, I think the first thing I ever saw him in was the movie Luck of the Irish. I think that was the first thing I ever saw him in. But just kind of in, like, how he's a Hephaestus here is actually interesting too, because one of the other things I know him from is Supernatural, where he played Cain. So it's not the same, but it's kind of in that otherworldly ballpark in that celestial lane of things. I just think it's kind of interesting. But either way, he was kind of saying, like, right, this is how it goes, and Percy's just gonna have to stay here. You got the shield, just kind of go, leave. You need help leaving, but she's like, no, I'm not gonna leave without him. And he talked about, like, right, your mom, she's disappointed in you because of what you've done. But hey, you got the shield. Now you're going to be the great hero and everything's going to be okay. Your mom's going to like you again. But for Annabeth, she's like, but that's the problem with you guys. It's all about power and glory. That's all what it's always been about for you guys. She's like, whether it's Zeus, whether it's Ares, whether it's even my own mom, all of you guys are so obsessed with it. She's like, even I was obsessed with it. But look at Percy. Like, the fact is that he isn't worried about any of that. He's just trying to do the right thing. He's just a kid trying to save his mom. That's all he cares about. He's not trying to be a hero. That's all his goal is. He's not being selfish like the gods are. And she's like, I was almost that person. I don't want to be that person anymore. You know, and Hephaestus kind of like responded to that and ended up freeing Percy because he says not all of us like that side of us either. So that's why I'm like, there's so much of Hephaestus' story we don't know. And like I said, maybe like they keep it vague, but maybe if you know enough Greek mythology, if you know enough, then you'll probably be able to piece together what it is. You know, it's funny too. Aphrodite's one of the people, Aphrodite, at least from the little Googling I did, one of the people she's also hooked up with besides Ares was Dionysus. So for me to make that mistake of like, thinking Timothy Omundson was playing, I mistook Jason Mazzucas for him, who was playing Dionysus. So it just felt like that was almost kind of like an unintentional like salt in the wound, you know, which is kind of interesting. Like I said, I don't know enough Greek mythology to really say all that with a fact, but I just, having read that a little bit, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting that I made that mistake. But either way, they were able to walk away. Percy's safe, and they got the shield, and Hephaestus walks away, and even saying like, right, I will talk to your mom, because even he was like, yeah, your mom kind of getting pissed at you and kind of turning her back on you, it's kind of messed up, but I'll try to smooth things out, and I'll talk to your mom and kind of try to get her to understand, so... like I said, I'm just not fully sure, but like, I guess it's supposed to correlate with, I think, Hephaestus, like the way things went down, how he handled things. Even he didn't like that. I didn't think it's just one of his regrets of I did things, and that's why he's probably there at the amusement park in his solitude, because we don't know where things currently stand between him and Aphrodite's. Like I said, it wasn't like a marriage of love. It was kind of like she was kind of forced into it, and that just leads to deeper resentment. So they're probably not even together anymore, and it's just he carries a lot of that guilt and he kind of pushes it away. But I think this made it kind of come to the forefront of like, right, like I recognize how selfish we gods can be sometimes. So they go back and they give Ares his shield, and he gives them puts him in the back of a truck, and he's like, it's going to take you to a casino in Vegas, and then you're going to take like you could get in contact with Hermes, and Hermes will be able to get you a car ride to the underworld like that. Because that was interesting, because I was like, because when they went here, I was like, oh, are they not going to the casino? Because that's something I distinctly remember from the movie. I was like, oh, interesting. I guess they're not going to do it. But then he says the casino. I'm like, oh, okay, so we are doing that. I was like, interesting. I don't remember everything that went down in the casino. I remember, without spoiling it for anyone that doesn't know the casino part of the story, once again, I don't know how different it's going to be in the show, because I forgot, like, thinking back to the trailer, there was a shot where Annabeth Grover and Percy are, like, in the front of a place, and they're looking out, and it's like, that was most likely them at the casino. But I know how that story beat ends, and the aftermath, they have to deal with the repercussions of the casino situation playing out the way it did. So I'm assuming that story beat's going to be the same, but maybe the ins and outs of what actually goes down there are different. I actually don't remember enough about the casino, and I'm curious to see like if it ends up being the same. We'll talk about it more in the next episode when it happens. From the little I remember about the casino, whether or not it plays out the same way in whether it's going to play out the same way in the show or not. But cause we do have 3 episodes. Like, cause I was about to say, I was like, would they even have enough time to do? Because I was like. Because, yeah, I think the casino is one of the last story arc beats that happens before we get to the, like, climax of the story. So, but like I brought up earlier, Grover does say that he's figured out who stole the lightning bolt. So, like I said, it's that thing of, I know who stole it based in the movie, and I'm assuming it's going to be the same thing in both the book and this as well. Like I said, I just can't. I think I remember the reasoning, but I don't remember enough to say that super confidently. I'm probably like 50-50 on whether I remember like the person's motivation. I mean, like I said, I think it's kind of like a motivation that everyone has when it comes to the gods, like their view of the gods and why they have such issues with the gods. I don't know. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where the next episode takes us with that, when Grover explains how he was able to kind of figure out who potentially stole the lightning bolt. And if he talks about it early enough in the episode, that might. I'm curious, like, is he going to get it wrong at first? Or is he going to get it right off the bat? We'll have to wait and see how that all plays out next episode. But I'm excited to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.